Well, good morning, good afternoon. This is Scott over at ReadySquirrel.com. Today's article is 26 Ways to Prepare for Societal Collapse. I hope everybody's doing okay. I know this is a rough week, and yeah, this has been a rough week. Okay, 26 ways to prepare for societal collapse. Prepare to survive social and economic collapse under conditions that resemble a Mad Max movie. No laws, no law enforcement, no public services, no supply chains, and currency devaluation. An environment of chaos and unpredictability where the only thing between surviving or not is your preparation. Use the following 26 concepts to prepare you and your family to survive societal collapse caused by national catastrophes, economic collapse, war, disease, or famine. And then there's links to all the different contents in the article, or you can go over to ReadySquirrel.com and you can check, you can check the article out on the blog. First thing, work towards self-reliance. When you first start prepping for long-term emergencies like societal collapse, it can be overwhelming. I need to chill because I'm a little bit on edge right now. I went for a long run yesterday, chilled me out. I'm on 3 cups of coffee, and with everything that's going on, I've been having a hard time concentrating. Okay, work towards self-reliance. When you first start preparing for long-term emergencies like societal collapse, it can be overwhelming. The easiest way to get started is to write an outline of the general areas you need to prepare for, such as water, food, equipment, and skills. Your initial focus should be to store water and food. If you haven't done that, you shouldn't be doing anything else. Water and food, water and food, water and food. And water is the number one priority, the most important thing for SHTF. You need a way to treat water. You need a way to get water from a natural source or from a well. Water is super important. You can't stay clean, you can't cook food, and you can't stay hydrated if you don't have water. According to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, you need a minimum of 1 gallon of water per day to survive, and half of that water is for hygiene and half of it's for hydration. To survive the societal collapse, you're going to need a lot more water than a gallon. That's not going to cut it long term. It works short term. 1 gallon of water per person per day. Consider that you flush the toilet once and you've used 200% of your daily water allotment. To survive the societal collapse, you're going to need a lot more water than 1 gallon per day per person. I think I just said that. Survival and self-reliance involves dirty labor, including activities like gardening, raising chickens, and processing food. You'll need a lot of water to stay clean. So just think about that. You're going to go from conveniences, more than likely, unless you're running a generator with fuel to keep washing machines, dishwashers, and stuff like that running. But more than likely, in an SHTF situation, a major catastrophe, a major societal collapse, you're going to want to conserve resources. So you're going to be doing 90% of the stuff that you depended on machines to do, either through electricity or through an internal combustion engine, you're going to be doing by hand. So you're going from modern conveniences like we have now. You throw a load in the washer, you go out to get a cup of water out of the faucet. On the way by, you throw the clothes into the dryer, they get dried. The hardest thing you have to do is fold them. Some people probably aren't even doing that. So you're in a societal collapse. To a certain extent, you're going to be going back in time. You're going to have a daily life more like a pioneer. And if you think about that, what did the pioneers do all day? Especially the ones that first pushed out where there wasn't a lot of population. All they did all day long was survive. Like, they practiced survival. They worked in the field. They worked in the garden. They mended clothes. They were cobblers. They did animal husbandry. Somewhat to some extent, security, self-defense, and that's what you're looking at if we're going to an SHTF or societal collapse. So some things to consider: chemicals are especially hard to get out of groundwater and require a reverse osmosis system, and these reverse osmosis systems are not always effective. They're pretty technical. They're expensive. Even if you do have the system, I don't know if it's something that you can depend on in SHTF, especially not if you're using electricity to move your water. So if you store water when it's clean, you can use simple methods to clean it, like filtering, boiling, or treating it with chemicals like bleach. So you can get rid of things like bacteria. You can filter water to get rid of things like bacteria. You cannot get rid of toxic chemicals by boiling water, by filtering water. Most types of filtering, I'm talking here like a hiker or a backpacker's filter. So your water might be a little bit stale, right? But you took it out of the ground when it was clean. So you can treat that water and drink it. But if you're taking water, let's say you've got dirty groundwater from a hurricane or some kind of nuclear disaster, the groundwater is all contaminated. Well, you're not going to be able to get that stuff, those chemicals out of the groundwater. For long-term water supply, catch and store rainwater. Take water from freshwater sources like lakes, rivers, and streams. Punch a water well or siphon water from freshwater pools. For societal collapse, you need enough water to last an indefinite amount of time. So it seems like a pipe dream, but you're gonna if you live in an urban area or if you live in a desert area, you're gonna have to do a lot of planning to make sure that you put yourself in a situation where you have enough water. And the best thing to do is to move to a place where, if you can, and you have the resources, move to a place where the land will give you what you need. 7 things you use water for in SHTF: hydration, sanitation and hygiene, washing clothes, maintaining gear and equipment, gardening, food preparation, livestock. I'm not sure if that's the correct word, because when I think livestock, I'm thinking chickens too, not just cows, pigs, or the larger animals, goats. Stockpile food, priority number 2 for SHTF. Humans can survive without food for about 2 weeks before they perish or become so lethargic they can't function. Store food to survive. Short-term emergency food. You want to store short-term emergency food to get yourself started. That's usually the best way to start, to get the engine moving. Stock up on non-perishable canned foods and bottled water for FEMA's suggested 72-hour emergency kit, which includes 2,000 calories per day per person and 1 gallon of water per day per person. Long-term emergency food. After setting up short-term food supplies, start working on bulk food for long-term survival. These types of foods have a shelf life of 30 years if stored properly. I've been pretty bad about storing my long-term food supply. I have a ton of rice. I have a ton of wheat. I've got big bags of sugar. I've got tons of beans. And I just ordered Mylar bags and 2,000, I can't think of the term for it, oxygen absorbers. So I just ordered oxygen absorbers. So I'm going to be doing some videos on setting up long-term food supplies. I'm also I'm giving up my walk-in closet. I'm going to use it 100% for food storage. I've been minimizing anyway, so I'll put my clothes out in the shed or something. I don't know. I'll figure something else out. So long-term emergency food. After setting up short-term food supplies, start working on bulk food for long-term survival. These types of foods have a shelf life of 30 years if stored properly. I mean, you want to focus on these kind of foods because, you may not have the most interesting diet, but you're going to have a base or a foundation upon which you can add things that you barter for, things that you forage, fishing, hunting, meats, and found items. You'll have that base in place. So that you're going to be eating. So white rice, 30 plus year shelf life. Brown rice, you do not want to store for long-term storage because it's got oils and it'll only last, even if it's stored in Mylar bags and food grade pails, it's only going to store for like 18 months. You want to store dried beans. The best profile for a bean is the soybean. The problem with soybeans is that they're not like what we typically think of as like a boil and eat type of a bean that you can make, stews and soups and chilies out of. And I have an article. I need to link to that, the different types of dried beans and kind of the profiles. I have black beans. I have pinto beans. Trying to think. That's probably the bulk of my dried bean storage, just because it's readily available. It's very easy to find. You want to store hard grains like wheat. That's something else that I'm doing. I'm trying to find hard grade wheat. I got all excited last week. I found a place, I think in Idaho. Yeah, I'm a moron. I found a place in Idaho that's got some really good wheat berries. They have like the old spalt grains like the Romans used on the march, just really, really good. I'm like, wow, I can't believe how cheap this is. It's like $26 for a 50-pound bag. Okay, so then I go and I put all this stuff in my cart, and then I go to hit order, and then the shipping was like $400. So I'm like, oh, duh. So I'm looking for hard grains like wheat, and this is not flour. This is the wheat berry that you have to hand grind and make bread from. This is on the list. This is definitely something that I'm going to be doing, and I'll be doing videos on it. Instant potatoes, dent corn. This is kind of a process. Dent corn is actually used to make what's called masa for corn tortillas. This is not, your typical Iowa sweet corn. It's more of it's used as a grain. It's ground and it's put through a process to make the flour for the tortillas. So if you decide to go with dent corn, you need to learn how to use it. It's not just you grind it and then you use the flour to make tortillas. There's more to it than that. Salt, sugar, honey, soy sauce, rolled oats, pasta, dehydrated foods, freeze-dried foods, dried lentils with split peas, low-fat powdered milk, powdered eggs. One thing that I found interesting, I was watching a video on kind of the societal collapse in Venezuela. There's really no other way to put it. And I don't know, that might get this video taken down, but a guy was a fisherman, and he was talking about how he was using his fish to barter, and that's something we'll talk about later in the article. And it was one of the things that I hadn't really thought of, but he's like, well, I can't, I'm catching a lot of fish every day, but I don't have any way to refrigerate because the electrical system there is unreliable. It's constantly going down. And so what he was doing is he was going to a central market, and then he was trading for other food items like vegetables, beans, rice, hard grains, and things like that. So we'll talk about bartering a little bit down below, but I mean, so these foods are not just for you to eat. These are also things that you can barter. There's a lot of controversy surrounding bartering food and true societal collapse, true SHTF. There's also, what I want to say, there's a little bit of controversy surrounding surviving as a group versus surviving as a lone wolf. And general consensus seems to be that there's not going to be necessarily the abilities to survive as a lone wolf unless you're a predator and you're running around, tactically taking advantage of people. I don't know what the right answer is there, and I don't really know how people will truly act. I think it depends on how bad things really get. I mean, if you look at, some of the food starvation issues that they had in China, during the Mao era, people were actually trading kids, their kids for somebody else's kid, and they were consuming them as a food product. So that's almost like I don't know. It's almost unimaginable to think about that. So my point was, if you're going to barter something like this, I think it depends on the circumstance, how bad the situation is, and that's going to go for bartering in general, unless you're bartering for skills. But then, somebody could have you do work and then knock you over the head. So, if you have a group that's together and you know the people, you probably stand a little better chance of things going well. If you've got a group and you've got your own security set up, and it's a kind of a controlled barter situation like a market. That might be a better way to go. Anyway, it's just something to consider. It's not just straight up, I'm going to barter, because there's going to be people out there that don't have anything to trade and they're hungry and they want what you have. Where do I stop? I think pasta, dehydrated foods, freeze-dried foods, dried lentils and split peas, low-fat powdered milk. This seemed to be one of the top items in Venezuela that people wanted, the powdered milk, powdered eggs. Prepare storage space for short and long-term food storage. Storage is a challenge, especially if you're working with a small space. I'm in the process of hanging my clothes in an outdoor shed so I can use my closet to store food. I'm going to make do with what I have. Don't worry too much about not having the perfect space. If you're serious about prepping for hard times, you can find the room. Storage isn't complicated, but there are a few rules you want to follow. Avoid storing foods in your garage or outside in the shed. Fluctuations in temperature severely reduce shelf life. Ideal food storage is cool, dry, clean, pest-free with good ventilation. Prime temperatures are below 75 degrees Fahrenheit and above freezing. It may be difficult to get constant temps of 75 degrees, so pick your coolest, darkest location. Do the best you can with what you have. Food storage racks or pantry-type shelving can be put just about anywhere. Make them from dimensional lumber or buy gorilla-type racks. You can also store food under beds and closets inside furniture. Tip: if your containers are clean, keep them out of direct sunlight to slow oxidation of food. And then for a more thorough examination of food storage, you can go to the article at readysquirrel.com and click where should I store my long-term food supply. I'm actually, I think I already said this, but I'm actually building some shelves right now. And I want them to look good because I'm going to store weapons and ammo and food and everything in that one space. And then probably I'll have some stuff out in the shed, stuff that I can store that I don't need, temperature control with. But the one thing that I don't have in here, I should probably put in the article, that you should consider is weight. The weight of the items and the kind of shelving that you put in. I went for a shelving type that's, I'm trying to think of what the word is for it. You can't see the supports, not going to work. So I did a bunch of work on this, and I'm going to have to go in after the fact, and I'm going to have to put metal supports in to support the weight. I don't know. I wasn't thinking ahead. I wanted to get it done or get it going because I've got materials coming that I'm going to need to use to start putting my long-term food away for long-term storage, and I need a place to store the stuff because it's all over the bedroom on the floor, and my wife's ready to kill me. So pick a bug-out location and plan for shelter. This is the ideal situation, right? I mean, you're in an urban area you're in an area that's not a great bug-out location. You don't have any other options. You're going to have to make do with what you have. But this is the ideal kind of scenario. Ideally, your survival location will be out in the country, away from dense populations and main roads. In an SHTF situation, there will be hordes of hungry, desperate people. These desperados will want what you have. Stay hidden, stay alive. I'm a big fan of stay hidden, stay alive if possible. Especially in a societal collapse, depending on what the situation is. Pick a bug-out location that provides a clean year-round water source, like a lake, river, or pond. Look for areas with abundant wild game, edibles, and trees for building, cooking, and heat. Choose land close to large preserves, national parks, or other large bodies of protected land that provide ample resources and a lot of extra space. You may not own the land, but can use it if things head south. And what I mean by that is, if you've got an acre next to a national park, you can use that national park to look for resources. Due diligence, know about covenants, HOA easements, mineral water rights, and neighbors before purchasing land for a bug-out location so you can build what you need without added expense or restrictions. If you don't have resources to purchase land, find a wildland area close to you and start camping and hiking to get familiar with the surroundings and use this location to bug out in case of an emergency. So this is like, worst case scenario. If you're renting an apartment, you're just starting out, or for whatever reason you can't afford to buy land or to move, you can still go through the process of learning how to cook outside, learning how to use your gear, learning how to use your prepper equipment. You can still find state or federal land that you use to camp out, and you can use that down the road as a bug-out location. So just because you can't afford land doesn't mean that you can't start working on a bug-out location. Shelter for societal collapse. The shelter you build should protect you year-round from the worst type of weather. Basic hiking and camping tents are good for short-term emergencies, but they aren't optimum for the long haul. A bug out shelter doesn't have to be fancy or cost an arm and a leg. If it keeps you warm, dry, and safe, then it's adequate. Low on funds, use sweat equity to build structures from natural materials or invest in a garden shed and retrofit it with insulation and a small wood burning stove. Here are some other ideas for bug out shelters: tarp shelter, A-frame, cabin, longhouse, Viking house, tree house, lean-to, military surplus tent, yurt, RV or camp trailer, garden or utility shed, Connex box, bushcraft dugout. Here's a cool video, Outdoor Boys. I love this guy. He's so cool. The videos are cool, family friendly. He has 3 boys now. He's LDS. He lives in, no, I'm not LDS, but he's LDS. He lives in Virginia. He has 2 channels, and I have no vested interest in this guy or in this channel. I'm not getting in it. I just really like the guy. He has 2 channels. He does a lot of catfish. He likes catfish and he likes carp, and he goes all over the world, and he takes his kids with him, and he does these fishing trips. They go to Alaska. He's been to Japan, all over the place. He's a fun guy, good-natured, and these are some feel-good videos if you need a break from politics and everything else. Camouflage your bug out shelter and location. Imagine an SHTF situation where a prison population escapes after cleaning out the armory and stealing many vehicles. Do you want to stay hidden from the escaped convicts or get in a firefight? Camouflage your bug out space and stay safe. Stay hidden, stay alive. Avoid open soil, new roads, heavy paths, etc. because they give away your location. Disguise bug out shelter excavation with plant materials or camouflage netting. Keep your compound looking natural looking. If you have a lot of time, start planting edible landscaping like fruiting trees and bushes. Use building materials that blend in like logs, saplings, or wood siding. Paint shiny surfaces with flat paint to reduce glare and blend structures with the surroundings. Avoid shiny colors and materials that cast a reflection. If you have windows, consider creating wood shutters that can be closed. For brightly colored tents, cover with saplings, pine boughs, or tall grasses. Right angles are uncommon in nature. Use netting, natural materials, and plantings to break up unnatural patterns like squares and rectangles. If you have antennas for equipment like ham radios or wind turbines, do your best to disguise the outline. Interplant with trees, up against hillsides, whatever you can do to disguise them. Camouflage your garden by interplanting with natural vegetation using permaculture and food forestry techniques. Consider precious metals. I'm not a huge fan of this. I know there are people out there that are. What do I know? I'm not a huge fan of stocking up on precious metals. I prefer to buy gear, equipment, and supplies or pay money for a skill set. You can't eat or drink bullion and it won't keep you warm or safe. If you decide to hoard gold or silver, keep in mind an adage: people will trade items for silver, but they will kill for gold. The only use for gold or silver in an SHTF scenario, in my opinion, is to conserve wealth. What could you buy today for the price of 1 ounce of gold with a spot price of, I think this was yesterday's spot price, 1 gold coin, 1 ounce, was going yesterday for $1,946.14. This is just kind of an eye-opener for me. What could you buy today instead of buying 1 ounce of gold? You could buy 3,476 pounds of long-grain white rice. You could buy 3,742 pounds of prairie gold wheat berries. You could buy 3,742 pounds of regular rolled oats. You could buy 3 PSA 15, 16-inch carbon length 5.56 M4 rifles, an AR profile from Palmetto State Armory. Of course, they're out of stock, but if they were in stock, that's what you could do. You could buy 3 of them. You could get, and these numbers here, you could probably search for some better prices if you could buy in bulk and if it was in stock. But I just pulled some numbers off of some typical websites. For the price of 1 ounce of today's price of gold, you can get 5,405 rounds of 7.62 by 39 non-corrosive FMJ Wolf ammo. That's what you put in an AK-47, which is a typical type of a rifle. You can get 2,510 rounds of 5.56 by 45 I put AK there. Why did I put that? That's wrong. That should be an AR platform. I put it in the wrong place. So you can get 2,500 10 rounds, 5.56 by 45. That should be AR, AR-15, M16. 62 grain FMJ Winchester ammo, out of stock, of course. You could get 465 38 ounce cans of Dinty-Moore Stew, 712 12 ounce cans of Spam Classic. So think about all the gear you could get for that. I mean, you might even be able to get like a heavy duty, what's the word I'm looking for? The guys that take you hunting, like a guide tent with a small wood burning stove. You might actually be able to find like a used army surplus tent that you could put a small wood stove in for that price. So that's the price of a bug out location. That was my point. Or a bug out shelter, rather. Cash for short-term emergencies. During a societal collapse, currency may lose value quickly, but you still need it short-term. It will get you from point A to point Z and allow you to purchase emergency items or last-minute fuel. Gas station and stores may be cash only because card systems are down. If you're planning for short-term emergencies like a hurricane, you may want to have $1,000 set aside to get gas, a hotel room, buy food, but this isn't the societal collapse scenario. When I'm talking about cash here, if society is going down. So if you're going to do cash, a lot of cash, you probably want to go with the precious metals to conserve wealth. If setting cash aside for the end of the world as we know it, have enough to get to where you're going. Grow food. This is huge, I think, and this is not simple. If you haven't done any gardening, I would highly suggest that you start, because it's not as easy and it's not as straightforward as you might think it is. I live in a new growing zone, which is each climate has certain specific types of plants that or bushes, fruiting trees that will do better based on the climate. And within each growing zone, there's what's called a microclimate. For instance, where I'm at, I'm on a microclimate. I'm pretty close to the seawater, and the soil is like almost 100% sand. And I don't really know what's going to do well here. So I have to go through the process of finding out what will grow here, and not only what will grow, but what will be almost invasive. Because if you're planting food stuff, you want a backbone of vegetables, fruiting trees, fruiting bushes, perennial vegetables, annual vegetables that are like as bulletproof as you can get them in your area. So if I planted a garden this year, let's say I did a raised bed, and that's another project on the list, but let's say I did a raised bed and I went out and I bought a bunch of soil and prepped it, and then I started using permaculture techniques to mulch, to conserve water so that I don't have to irrigate as much. Well, what do I not know about? Well, one, I don't know about the pests around here. So there even with, let's just take tomatoes for instance. One tomato, I'd say a specific cherry tomato could be super, super hardy here, and another cherry tomato will struggle, may produce no fruit. It takes time to learn that stuff. So start gardening, please. Start gardening, start planting fruit trees, start planting fruiting bushes. There are a lot of resources by state, by country, for people that are already trying to be self-sufficient when it comes to creating their food. Being 100% self-sufficient with gardening is very difficult, but it's good to know that you have the skills, and the only way to get those is through trial and error and getting started. There's a lot of articles out there that are kind of fluff. Do this, do that, do this, do that, but they're not going to be specific to your state. And if they're specific to your state, they're not going to be specific to your microclimate. Okay, so I got off on a tangent there. I like gardening. So 15, need to know concepts of survival gardening. This is things that you can study, and there's quite a bit more than this, but these are things that you can use as a point of reference to start studying. Even if you just look this stuff up on YouTube, it'll get you started. During a shit hits a fan situation, you won't be able to head down to the local nursery for plant starts or seeds. Plan to provide all your garden needs without outside assistance. Here are some general terms that will get you started in planting a survival garden. A growing zone, we kind of already talked about that. It tells you which plants are more likely to do well where you live. You want plants that are vigorous in your area, bordering on invasive. Crop rotation, growing. Okay, crop rotation. Why do I have that there? The reason I have that there is in an SHTF situation or societal collapse, you're not going to have the ability, more than likely, to get things like store-bought fertilizer. But there's ways that you can do it naturally. One of those ways is crop rotation. When I lived on the East Coast, all my beds, one of the things that I like to use a lot was clover. So I knew clover would pump nitrogen into the soil, and I knew it would increase the organic matter. It would pump up the earthworms, and then I would just rake that stuff into the soil when I planted my vegetables out in the spring or fall, depending on what I was planting. So crop rotation can actually be used and partially take place of what you're taking out of the soil. So some plants may take X out of the soil, and then a follow-up plant puts that back into the soil. So you can actually use crop rotation and avoid using store-bought chemicals. Plant propagation, this is going to be huge. Also, plant propagation is a way to extend or expand what you're planting. It's a way to make many plants from just one plant, tree, or shrub. You can practice different methods, including plant cuttings, air layering, division, seed collecting. Propagating is a good way to create a food forest without spending money. So if you have a neighbor that has a fruit tree that does really well, or you meet somebody in a gardening club that has this specific apple or citrus tree that's just like really, really does well in your area, you can do something to try to propagate that stuff. Now, the downside of seeds, which is a form of propagation, things like apple trees, they're not going to produce fruit for years. Same goes with nut trees. They're not going to produce fruits for years. So you want to do a little bit of research on propagating different kinds of plants. What propagation is super good for? I can think of a couple things. I took three different varieties of hazelnut. I had one plant each. I took that up to like 22, and I was going to air layer again this year and do that. So I went from 3 hazelnut plants. Hazelnuts are awesome. It's a nut. You can make oil out of it. You can eat it. It's high protein. I took it from 3 plants to like 22, 23 plants just by air layering. I could have gotten a lot more out of them, but I didn't know if it was going to work or not. It did work. Again, trial and error. And believe me, when I was doing gardening, I had 3 acres. I had a lot of stuff. I had plums. I had heirloom apples. I had grapes. I had a ton of plants for pollinators, which is something that you can't discount. You need pollinators. That's micro wasps all the way up to bumblebees. You need to provide food for them, because what ends up happening is you kind of create an ecosystem, and everything amps up. My food forest, I planted it like 5 years before I moved, and this year was the bust out year. It was starting to take itself over and become more self-reliant. So I got off on a tangent there. I apologize. Bioaccumulating plants, you want to consider those like comfrey, black locust, willow. They create nitrogen. You can feed to your garden by mulching garden beds or just planting fruit trees next to them, like willows, for instance. There's so much you can do with those. So, we talk about having redundancies in place. Willow, the Indians use willow for like aspirin. You can make baskets from willow. You can make trellis works, fences from willow, living or dried and dead willow. And then also willows pump nitrogen into the ground. Black locusts. Black locust trees, a lot of them, people consider them not the best tree, but they pump nitrogen into the soil. Bees absolutely love the blooms. You can make fence posts out of them, like if you're coppusing, that's where you top the tree. You can make tool handles. You can make fence posts that will last up to 100 years without putting any kind of finish on them, because the wood is super, super tough. Comfrey, the Roman soldiers called that knit bone. Good for, you could use that on wounds. Some people, and it's controversial, some people eat it. for medicinal purposes. The downside about something like Comfrey is you really want to know what you're doing with that, because it will frickin' take over, and you want to make sure you get a variety that's not seeding. Anyway, I'm getting off track. You can tell I like to garden. So bioaccumulating plants like Comfrey, black locusts, and willows. Storing and conserving seeds. Learn to store seeds from the best tasting, most vigorous plants in your vegetable and flower garden. And you want to use open pollinated seeds for that. Companion planting. Plant things together that are complementary, like corns, beans, and squash are a good example. Each of the 3 plants adds something to the group that makes the group of plants more vigorous together. Perennial food forestry, a low-maintenance way of growing fruit and nut trees based on a forest system. The garden includes perennial vegetables, fruiting shrubs, edible vines, and flowers. Landrace gardening, a traditional method of growing food in which the seeds to be planted next year result from the survival of the fittest in a particular garden in a previous year. So you grow a tomato, you have 10 tomato plants, 9 of the 10 tomato plants die, you take the seeds from that one tomato plant, you plant them again, you get 10, maybe 5 survive, maybe of those 5, one has really good tasting tomatoes and it's highly pest resistant. You take the seeds from that one and you don't take the seeds from the other 4 or the 5. You plant that. You see what I'm saying? So over time, you create like a super strain of a vegetable that does really well in your specific microclimate and where you're at. Silvopasture, a method of raising animals in a food-type forest. It's an integration technique using animal rotation to improve land and quality of meat. If you're one of those guys that wants to buy 40 acres and a mule, and you want to move somewhere, and you really want to have livestock, and you want to have nut trees, you want to have fruit trees, silvopasture is definitely 100% something that you can look into. You have people combining cattle with nut trees. You have people penning and moving hogs around from area to area, feeding them acorns. There's all kinds of things you can do. And because you're moving the animals around, you're not leaving them in one place. It actually improves the land instead of ruining the land. So silvopasture is very cool. Permaculture, a set of design principles based on whole system thinking, created by Australian ecologist Bill Mollison. I'm not a huge fan of some of the politics in permaculture, but I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you're trying to set up a cabin, say, and you want everything to work together, you want to capture sun, you want to use your sanitation and your waste, you want to plant trees in the right spot, you want the water to move around the land in the right way, you want to capture water, all kinds of things you can talk about. That's permaculture. It's the whole system. It's the cabin. It's what you do with your waste. It's where you plant your food. It's the building's relationship to the sun. It's solar. It's all those things. It's like whole system. Vertical gardening, growing plants up instead of out, useful if you have limited space. Mulching, placing plant or biomatter on garden beds and around trees and plants, feeds plants, improves soil, and maintains ground moisture. This is big, especially in the beginning of food forestry, permaculture type gardening. Mulch is huge. It really, really exponentially improves your soil and the biology of the soil, and it really, really cuts down on the amount of irrigation that you have to do. Unless you live in some place like Arizona, where things just get destroyed. I lived there for a number of years. Really hard to garden there. But if you live in a somewhat temperate climate, you can literally get to the point where you're mulching and you don't even have to irrigate, as long as you're getting enough rain. Multiple fruit trees. I didn't know what to call this, but I think it's a technique worth mentioning. You can get multiple fruit trees and plant them in the same hole, 24 inches apart. This is used to maximize fruit production in a limited space. The one thing you want to watch out for here is, more than likely, let's say you plant 4 varieties of apple because they cross-pollinate each other. They're in the same hole. You keep them small so that you can get the fruit within reach. at least one of those varieties is going to be more vigorous. It's going to grow faster than the other ones. So you need to make sure that that one tree doesn't take over the other three. So you need to keep it pruned. Hugelkultur mounds and gardening. A raised garden bed built with logs, sticks, and other biomass. Hugelkultur mounds are excellent in areas where you can't water regularly. They can be used in conjunction with mulch. I had what's called a keyhole garden on the East Coast. With the hugelkultur mounds, my son helped me. We dug down like 4 feet. We filled it with logs. Then we put twigs on top of that. Then we put some compost on top of that. And then I took the rocks and moved them and used them for something else. And then we put the soil back on top. And then I planted the whole thing with clover to get the soil started. And that thing was, by the time I left, I think the hugelkultur mound was 3 years old and it was pumping the vegetables out. Korean natural farming uses microorganisms in the soil and other natural materials to increase soil fertility, increase earthworm populations, and the soil's overall health. Survival tips. If you have the skills to bring fallow land to a point of production, you become a valuable resource for the unprepared around you. A labor force willing to work for food will bring the entire prepper community to a higher level of survival. Practice specialty skills related to gardening and fruit production, like using a still to make alcohol, baking bread, making hard cider, or mead and honey from beekeeping. Tobacco, consider farming a small amount of tobacco for barter. Tobacco can also be used to keep certain pests away from your food plants. And that goes for, there's a lot of plants out there that you can use to naturally deter pests. Learn food preservation methods. In a societal collapse, you'll have to conserve the food you raise have some more coffee. In a societal collapse, you'll have to conserve the food you raise or forage. Food may be plentiful in good weather, but you'll have to set food aside for tougher seasons like winter. You guys probably already know, but just a list: types of food preservation: drying, fermentation, pickling, water bath canning, dry canning, pasteurization, smoking, and salt curing. I'm not going to read those. Grains, rice, and beans. Why did I put that there? Hard grain, rice, and beans are so important for long-term storage. I gave them their own section. If you had to, you could survive on these foods alone for an extended period of time. When stored properly, you're looking at 30-year shelf life. Perfection, right? If you do nothing for SHTF but store hundreds of pounds of beans, rice, and wheat berries, you're way ahead of the game. And what I like about this is it's kind of this system of food. It's simple, and it has all the attributes of something that you can store a lot of. And it's something that you can use, you can rotate into your regular diet. It's not going to go to waste. Most of us eat rice. Most of us eat beans. Most of us don't mind eating, baked fresh bread. So, grains, rice, and beans, I think, are standout foods. Learn how to store these items in food-grade buckets. Get a hand-cranked grain mill and learn to process wheat berries into flour. I will shortly. I shouldn't say shortly. It's on the list to do this so that I can do videos on it. Because what I've read about this is not as easy as it may seem at first. Cranking, grain or cranking wheat berries to make flour. But I've noticed that there are actually some hand crank grain mills out there that you can hook up to a bicycle. There's some attachments, so I thought maybe that would be something worth looking into. Anyway, I'm going to be doing this. I'm just not doing it yet. Set yourself up with pots, pans, and possibly an outdoor bread oven that you can make from clay and straw. Start practicing your outdoor cooking skills. If you think you want to look into making a bread oven from clay and straw, and I'm talking about you're not buying anything, like you're not spending any money, and you have the space to do it. Townsend's on YouTube. They do 18th century reenactment. They do a lot of cooking and stuff. He actually has a really good video on making and cooking with clay and straw ovens. Baking, rather. Which brings up another thing. Baking during the colonial period, the baker was super important. Not only did he provide daily bread, which was like a big part of daily life, but they also the bakers also provided yeast for for their patrons to do things like beer making. So that's maybe a skill set you want to consider. Livestock. Start raising chickens, rabbits, or stockfish in your pond. Raising large livestock like cows are more complicated and takes a lot more resources than raising chickens. Start small and see if it's something you want to do. Eggs are an excellent protein source and they provide fat, which is hard to come by in a survival situation. Consider milk goats for cheese, milk and meat. Raise rabbits for meat and chickens for meat and eggs. Most Americans have a difficult time slaughtering animals. If this is the case, raise chickens and eat the eggs, or raise goats and use the milk to make dairy products. Hand tools. You can look at, I didn't go over the kitchen stuff. I think it's kind of self-evident, and actually I forgot, if I'm going to be 100% honest, but I did go over hand tools. Early pioneers built log cabins with 3 basic tools: a felling axe, a broadaxe, and a carpenter's axe. With a skill set or how-to manual, you can get a lot done with 0 electricity and a little willpower. These are 16 essential tools for your bug-out base camp. Felling axe, that's to cut down trees. A broadaxe, that's to flatten the tops of the logs out. A carpenter's adze, crosscut and rip saw, carpenter's hammer, sledgehammer, shovels, rakes, hoe, pinch bar or large digging bar, hand drill and bits, knives of all kinds, wood chisels and mallet, waterproof tarps of all shapes and sizes, rope and line, fasteners like screws and nails, unless you plan on doing some blacksmithing, standard and Phillips screwdrivers, a level and a square. To determine other tools you might need, or if you want to pick and choose, like think some of these you don't need, by creating a list of projects, that's a really good way to figure out what tools you need to complete a specific survival task. Like you say, well, I want to build a fence, or I want to build a small outbuilding. Like, what do I need to build that? So start a prepper manual or start a running list of notes. Cooking in SHTF or shit hit the fan. Cooking for long-term survival requires a fuel source that won't run out, such as cooking on a campfire or a wood-burning stove. Store-bought or purchased fuels are good for short-term emergencies, but they are a weak link when you need to cook and boil water for the long haul. If you're cooking outdoors, use cast iron pans to cook directly on hot coals or over a direct flame. A large Dutch oven with a lid is the single best piece of cast iron you can own. Cook just about anything in any style, from frying and boiling to baking. Use the lid turned upside down over hot coals to fry fatty meats. Experiment with how you will cook food when the grid is down. Consider cowboy kitchens, covered outdoor kitchens, wood-fueled ovens, wood-burning stoves and cooktops, tripod cooking over an open campfire, or build a colonial-style outdoor kitchen with do-it-yourself bread oven. Produce your own fuel or electricity. For long-term societal collapse, set your survival location up to run on renewable resources like wood. In a SHTF situation, you won't be calling for delivery of propane or fuel oil. Consider solar, wind, and hydroelectricity, which are good options for off-grid living. This is something different that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, and I think it's a pretty cool idea, especially if you've got the land to do it. Coppus and pollard fuel trees. In Europe, coppicing trees for firewood and fencing has been done for centuries. Many of the European forests are gone, so they have to conserve wood and treat it like a renewable resource. Coppicing certain trees for firewood keeps the tree alive and produces new wood you can cut for fuel. Not all woods are primed for this technique. The size of coppice wood works well to stoke clay bread ovens, wood stoves, and open campfires. Not all species are created equal when it comes to coppicing. One of the trees that I talked about earlier that's outstanding for a food forest as a nitrogen, what they call a nitrogen fixer, is black locust. It is also excellent for coppicing, so that's another use for that. So the best species for Coppus forestry: alder, black locust, elderberry, willow, chestnut, autumn olive, ash, elm, and oak. In my food forest, I had black locust, I had elderberry, various varieties, which also is fruit producing. Willow, I had like 10 varieties of basket willow, and then I had some of the larger willow trees. I did not have chestnut. I had planted a couple baby chestnuts, and then they were accidentally mowed over, and I didn't replant them. It was on the to-do list. Autumn olive, considered invasive, but especially in some of the states in the East Coast, but it's a nitrogen fixer, and it's good for coppusing, ash, elm, and some scrub oaks. This is pretty interesting. If you're like coppusing wood, what are you talking about? Take a look at this video, and it gives you a basic idea how it's done. It's kind of done on a rotation cycle, so you have to have enough trees that you can rotate. Hygiene and sanitation, put in a septic system or learn to dig a latrine, have enough water on hand to clean and cook. Learn to make soap. Learn to make soap from natural materials or hoard soaps you can use. Consider purchasing products like pool shock that you can easily mix into bleach solution for sterilizing. Store extra soap, disinfectants, and toilet paper. Physical fitness. If you're working on the rest of this list, you won't need to worry about exercise, but being physically fit is important for surviving tough conditions. Gardening, learning bushcraft, using hand tools, and getting your other supplies in order will be enough exercise. So get started prepping. I need to stretch. Learn bushcraft skills, start camping, and practice shelter building, fire starting, and how to carve implements so you can use around your homestead or survival location. Consider old technologies like pole lathes that can be set up on a sapling and used to turn wood bowls and spindles for furniture. Learn basic knots like the clove hitch, bowline, sheet bend, and the trucker's hitch. With paracord and wood, you can make some pretty cool stuff that will help you survive. First aid. In a truly catastrophic end-of-the-world scenario, you might not have access to a doctor or a specialist. It's just you and those around you. Store supplies, get first aid training, and have hard copies of first aid manuals. You alone can decide how deep you want to dive into first aid training and supplies. Some preppers stick with the basic supplies needed to treat everyday injuries, and some go deeper, setting up to treat trauma. Blacksmithing, setting up a small forge isn't expensive if you're willing to go scrapping. Talk about a great skill for bartering in the apocalypse. You might be the only guy around that can make necessary items from scrap iron. Simple blacksmithing is not difficult to learn. Use a homemade forge so you can repair your metal tools and make things like door latches, S-hooks, and small fittings for repair. Get good and you can forge axes, knives, froes, hammers, and other woodworking tools. Most of these items can be made from scrap metal. Prepare to protect yourself. This is a pretty lame section, I'm going to be honest up front, because I don't want to talk about guns too much. The most common rifles for self-defense are versions of the AR-15 because they are accurate, reliable, and simple to use. The AR is so popular in the United States, it should be pretty easy to barter for ammo and to find replacement parts. The .22 rifle, it's controversial whether the 22 has a place when it comes to self-defense, but it is an excellent lightweight caliber for hunting small game. You can carry thousands of rounds in a backpack and the ammo is readily available. 9mm pistol ammo is popular and readily available. Convertible single-action revolver. Some revolvers allow you to change ammo calibers by swapping out cylinders. This might be a good option if you are in a barter situation or scavenging. Shotgun, versatile, reliable, and simple. Shotgun shells come in all types of different purposes. That's not kind of a typo. You could get shotgun shells for all different purposes. There are many types of ammo, but the most common types are buckshot for hunting fowl and slugs used to hunt deer. When choosing a firearm for SHTF, consider the weapon's reliability and how easy it is to field strip for cleaning. Check your local gun laws before purchasing a firearm. So I just basically I have one of these. I have a bunch of these. I don't have that caliber, but I have quite a few pistols. I don't have a single action revolver, but I want one, and I have one of these. So pick and choose. If I was only able to have one thing, I think, honestly, if I could only have one thing, for me, and this is, people are going to argue up and down, left and right. For societal collapse, if I could only have one caliber, it would probably be the .22 rifle because it's so versatile and it's super lightweight. Start bartering now. Bartering is trading a skill or supply. This will be an essential skill if society collapses. The recent collapse in Venezuela is a good example of this. The only way people are getting food is if they barter for it. Start practicing this skill now. Look in your closet or garage for something you don't use anymore. Put the item on Craigslist or Facebook and trade it for something you'll use or want. Trade the initial item for something that's undervalued and keep bartering up from that initial item. Take an expensive item and barter for maximum profit. Keep bartering and see how high you can get on the value list. Typical items bartered for during SHTF. Think about what is readily available in your area and what is not. Seeds, food like sugar, powdered milk, rice and beans, medicine, hygiene items like razors, soaps, shampoo, flashlight, batteries, candles, matches, coffee, tea, and alcohol, tobacco, fuels, and again, skills. It always goes back to this, right? You know what I find interesting about the skills, especially if you're prepared, you can take these skills, let's say it's gardening, and you can be pumping out seeds. Like it's not something, oh, I ran out of seeds. Well, yeah, you're going to have a limited supply by year, but you can make some of this stuff by having the skill set. So the skills are invaluable. They're I can't say they're more important than the supplies because you're going to need those initial supplies to get you from A to Z. But skills are super, super important. Hard copies of books and manuals, and I am terrible at this. When I moved, I got rid of a lot of books, and I really regret it because it's getting harder to find written material. You can't depend on the internet or even on your computer in an SHTF situation. You know, power may be unreliable, power may be out. So hard copies of books and manuals. What was the ratio of bleach to put in a 55-gallon barrel for water sterilization? I'll look it up on the internet. No, you won't. Have hard copies of your survival manuals, how-to books, recipes, conversion tables, and etc. If you learn any skills on the list, have a way of looking stuff up that isn't based on electricity or a battery. Hand carts and wheelbarrows. Hand carts and wheelbarrows make for lighter work. Use them to make gardening, landscaping, feeding animals, or doing other labor that requires moving heavy materials. Having the means to transport stuff around your compound decreases the amount of time it takes to get a job done. It saves on calories burned and helps you keep from getting injured. Kind of along those same lines, and you got to learn how to use this stuff. Block and tackle, pulley systems, and winches. Of course, these are hand crank winches, not the winch on the front of a Jeep. Not that you wouldn't want to have that, but block and tackle are rope and pulleys you use to increase your lifting or pulling force. You can use a pulley system to lift heavy lumber during construction or drag boulders and other objects that you would not be able to move with just body strength, and that the same goes for a winch. Make lists or a prepping journal. This is the only way I can see that you're gonna keep your ducks in a row and keep from getting overwhelmed. Just go down the list, baby steps. My wife's big on lists. Now I am too. Start paying attention to the things you can't do without in an SHTF situation, and put them down on a list or in a prepping journal. Food, supplies, tools, skills, and etc. Putting ideas on a running to-do list will keep you from getting overwhelmed and make you feel in control. What do you need to get a specific job done? How will you get fresh meat? How will you cook? What equipment do you need to complete the task? What skills do you need? Your running list. That's a typo. Your running list helps you. By keeping a running list, you'll know what you need to research. You'll know the skills you need to learn, what equipment you need to practice a specific skill set. Let's say you want to fish in a stream or river close to your location, and you think a cast net would be effective. You put it on the list, purchase a cast net, and learn how to use it. That sparks another idea. You're using the cast net, you notice a lot of crawdads in the stream, so you write down, learn how to make and use a crawdad trap. The same concept applies to everything you'll need to survive. Keep a running list of things you need to supplement or replace an SHTF situation and work redundancy into your system by having more than one way to complete a task. Take action. I'm not preaching here, but I am, I guess. I'm not preaching here, but I am. It goes without saying, if we want to put ourselves in the best possible situation for SHTF, we have to get off the couch and start moving towards independence and self-sufficiency. I just put one resource on here today, Venezuelan Bartering. This is pretty interesting. It kind of shows you what a fisherman's doing to get what he needs based on the fish that he can provide. So it's basically just a video on bartering in Venezuela. Okay, guys, that was a long one, and I drank way too much coffee. I hope everybody's safe. Stay the course. Stay positive. Stay on track. Stay on target. Do what you know you got to do. Again, I hope everybody is safe and somewhat solid on solid footing. This is Scott with ReadySquirrel.com. I'll see you next time. Take care, guys.